Go live or is like, all right, we were talking about Joe Biden's terrible, no good, very bad year as president, and we're going to be discussing whether or not the end of the pandemic is in sight, and probably much more on episode 327 of the In the Tank podcast. All right. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. And joining me today, I was going to say Justin Haskins, but he bailed out at the last second. He's not going to be joining us. That's that. Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
Yeah, I'm all right. Kind of in a bad mood. You know, it's January 6th, and how we could even play that happy theme song on a day like today.
We're gonna
get just doesn't seem appropriate. Yeah.
We're definitely gonna get to that. Chris Talgo, senior editor at the Heartland Institute, also joining us. How's it going, sir?
I'm in a good mood, and I want to just give a big shout out to Jim Lakely for being the champion of his fantasy football league that he founded more than 2 decades ago.
2 decades ago, first time he ever won. So you do the math.
I'm awesome. Yeah, I'm great at that.
Awesome. So this week marks the end of the first year of the Joe Biden presidency. And in a brief reflection, I think you can make the case that it was one of the worst first years of any president in modern history. So I want to dedicate a large portion of this episode just reflecting on some of the lowlights of his presidency so far. And later we have to talk about COVID because there's been some interesting developments in that front over the past couple of weeks. But before we get to any of that, there's a couple of things that we need to clear up first. Number one, I promised before the holidays that we were going to have content throughout the holidays. This was the case on Christmas, the week of Christmas. We had Christian Toto on, and we talked about movies and pop culture. It was a really good episode. If you haven't checked it out, make sure you do. Last week, however, we were MIA. We were missing in action. This is largely my fault. It was the result of me getting COVID. That is right. I did exactly what Fauci told me not to do, which was have a large family gathering on Christmas. And we all got COVID.
Please clap.
How dare you?
We all got COVID. So, it was apparently the trend because I've heard a lot of the same stories from friends and family of COVID kind of going wild this past couple of weeks, but wasn't that bad. I don't regret it.
Fun time, huh?
Yeah. I was sick for about 2 days. I had a fever and a headache. And then after like literally a day and a half, it started to go away. And then all I've been dealing with in the past like week and a half is fatigue. Been very tired. It's kind of rough getting up in the morning. But beyond that, that's kind of my only lingering effect. I lost my taste and smell like a week after I started feeling better just a couple of days ago, but then that came back like yesterday, so that wasn't too bad. So yeah, I got the natural antibodies now, so take that, all you vaccine people.
No, you still need a booster and 2 other boosters and the original vaccine. And how could you be so irresponsible, Donnie, to get COVID, to have all those people over? Don't you know that our entire culture has been, this is where you deserve it. That's actually what happens. You deserve to be sick. I can't believe your taste and smell came back so fast. That is just so unjust. How could you be so irresponsible? How could you try to live your life?
I can't believe you had the audacity to celebrate Christmas. How dare you?
What the hell's wrong with you? You're the reason why we can never get out of this, Donnie.
Yes.
You're the reason why.
Forget it, Donnie. You're out of your element.
There you go.
It's true. It's true. Were we all vaccinated? So ask me anything. I had COVID. Ask me anything. We've got a question here. All vaccinated too? No. In fact, only my dad was vaccinated out of all of us, and we are all equally sick. So it didn't seem like his vaccine got him anywhere. But
did any of your family members have a rougher time of it than you did? I mean, you were actually still texting me and it's still kind of working while you were sick for the most part.
Yeah, I think my sister was probably had it the worst. She was kind of out with the same fever and headache for about 4 days instead of a day and a half. But outside of that, I think that was the worst case. My mom had like a fever for like half a day. That was it. That's all that she swore by. And then my wife had a cough on top of the headache and fever, but that's about it. And the cough is still lingering for her, but she's fine. So
is this worse or about the same or not as bad as like maybe the worst flu you've had or like the last time you got the flu, you know?
No, this was the last time I had the flu a couple of years ago was so much worse than this. And I fully acknowledge that this was a mild case. I think it was the Omicron variant or whatever. But yeah, like I was still having to take care of, my kid and stuff, so it didn't keep me completely in bed. But it wasn't fun. I won't paint like an absurdly rosy picture of this. But yeah, it was interesting. What's funny is I went to go get like tested just to make sure that I had it, to remove all doubt that this was in fact COVID. And by then I was already starting to feel better and all of that. And so when they were doing the test, I was actually kind of like hoping like, oh man, I hope this isn't just something else. Right. So they came back with the test results and they're like, you're testing positive. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Like I was actually relieved to hear that I had COVID. And the lady's like, I'm sorry. I'm like, oh no, it's no problem. Don't worry about it.
It's fine. I'm not panicked. I don't think I'm gonna die. Thank you. Thanks for the diagnosis. Yeah.
So there you go. So we'll see what happens. And but we got a lot to talk about COVID later. So I want to get to our topics at hand. One additional thing to address before moving on to our topics, though, and that, of course, is the fact that today is January 6th. This, of course, is the anniversary of an event that we will never forget or ever forgive, if you ask me.
Basket of deplorables.
We have institutions in this country that are supposed to be sacred, but all of this was thrown out the window on January 6th. 1994, when Tonya Harding's ex-husband hired an assailant to attack Nancy Kerrigan. I mean, I thought I was the only one that cared about the events of January 6, 1994, and I was surprised to see that it was trending on Twitter.
His name is Jeff Gillooly, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Jeff Gillooly. We'll never forget. So what are your guys' thoughts on Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan? It seems to be what's trending on Twitter.
Yeah, I remember that. That was that was actually really bizarre and crazy. But no, seriously, the January 6th. What's I think I was asking you, Donnie. I think we were either doing a live podcast. I don't think we did it live back then, but we were recording a podcast while the insurrection, while the assault on the Capitol was taking place. I can't remember if we were actually doing it at the time or whether we had just finished. And I remember you and Justin were like, this is crazy. Can you believe what's happening at the Capitol right now? And my attitude then, a year ago, is the same as it is now. I don't care. Wait,
that's what they're talking about? They're talking about last year's January 6th?
Last year's January 6th. Yeah.
No one cares. I thought they were talking about Nancy Kerrigan.
Yeah, that's right.
This is ridiculous.
My attitude then is as it is now. I don't care. After a summer of riots, after cities on fire for months on end, I'm supposed to, consider this the worst thing that's ever happened in this country, that this is some kind of insurrection and a coup. And now, I mean, Chris, God bless you. You watch CNN and MSNBC. This must be like Christmas for them, on times 10, because they've just been going on and on about this forever. And one of my favorite reactions there was, it's not, AOC. She famously, thought that she was going to die. She was literally, in an office building pretty far away from all the action that was going on. Yet I heard that she's still in therapy, or she had undergone psychotherapeutic treatment to deal with the trauma that she experienced on January 6th. This whole thing is just so overblown, but it's the media, the disgusting, corrupt media that are actually some of the worst of all on this stuff. There was a reporter for the Washington Post who noted that the Washington Post gave the 38 journalists who covered the January 6th insurrection and coup, this is all in her tweets, the paper's annual Ben Bradley Award for courage in journalism. And the award was honored, quote, their commitment to carrying out the job in a volatile and dangerous environment, and also acknowledged the tremendous personal risk they took. Now, mind you, most, if not all, of the reporters who are experiencing so-called trauma over January 6th reported on it from their fat asses in front of a computer screen miles away, or maybe even in another state, right? If I was a war correspondent, if I went to like Iraq or Afghanistan and was embedded with like, special forces troopers or something, and came under actual regular enemy fire, I might be a little bit pissed off that these people who didn't actually experience any trauma are getting these awards for courage under fire and the personal risk they took. It's disgusting. It really is. I would say it's unbelievable, but not from our media. Our media is completely ridiculous and unserious. And that's why, I don't think they have the influence they used to have.
Well, I would routinely ask Chris, what are they talking about on CNN, MSNBC? And your response is always, for the past year, January 6th. Mm-hmm. They never stopped talking about it. So yeah, like Jim said, is it like Christmas over there? What have you tuned in last night? What's the spirit over there?
Because most of their programming over the past year has been dedicated to January 6th coverage. I mean, they are going full on, Jan 6 solemn mode. CNN's going to have a special. Jake Tapper and all the rest will be there. But I have a different take on the thing. So they keep calling it an insurrection. However, not one person has been charged with insurrection. So first of all, the charges don't fit the crime that they're trying to portray. And secondly, I think it's really disgusting that so many of those people who entered the Capitol building are still sitting in that Washington D.C. jail. They haven't even gone to trial yet. Here we are 1 year later.
Yeah, I think Jim's position on this is probably the most extreme of anybody on the right. This idea that I don't care. This is overstated. They're making too much of this. That's probably as far as, we'll go.
No, there's farther to go. I can go farther, but this is where I am. Yeah, and it's a reasonable position. It's not that I don't care. Look, it was bad. We've said this a million times. Riots shouldn't happen. That's not a proper expression of political opinion, is to riot and to attack people. But it was going on all summer, and our media celebrated it. I mean, how many times do we have to show the screen cap of CNN? Fiery but peaceful protests. They're standing in front of burning buildings saying that these people are all peaceful. Chicago, and then all the follow-ons to that, the Miracle Mile, or I'm sorry, the Magnificent Mile, the Mag Mile here in Chicago. All these high-end stores are just looted, and they had to close off the city like we're in Batman or something. I mean, it was insane. And the Democrats in this country and our media defended it, saying that was fine because it was to advance. So there it is, and it was to advance social justice. No, it was rioting. It was destruction. And there were cops injured. There were hundreds and hundreds of cops injured all over the United States during these riots. And there wasn't a word said about sympathy for them. Nope. The federal courthouse in Portland they locked themselves into the federal courthouse in Portland. And the protesters from BLM and Antifa were throwing Molotov cocktails, trying to set the building on fire. Now, what happened on January 6th at the Capitol was terrible. It should not have happened. And as Chris just pointed out, this is the biggest dragnet in FBI history.
Right.
Hundreds of people have been charged. Dozens and dozens are in jail right now in solitary confinement, held before trial. Most of these people don't have a single blot of criminality on their records. And they're sitting there rotting in jail before they can even get a fair hearing, let alone a trial. That's what I mean by this is so out of proportion. And I don't care about it because of all of what happened the summer before. Now, the real injustice here is what's happening to these people that are accused. If they're guilty, and as Chris pointed out, not a single person is charged with trying to overthrow the government or insurrection or a coup or treason or any of that stuff. Most, if not everybody that is charged in this thing is charged for trespassing.
Right.
That's it. It's a misdemeanor in most other places. Yet almost everybody who was setting cities on fire, rampant, billions of dollars worth of destruction, and most of it to small businesses and minority communities, where's the long list of people that are paying for those crimes? The answer is there isn't one, because they're not, because the Democrat prosecutors in these places don't want to prosecute them. They just make it all go away. So that's what, that's why I'm in a bad mood, because we are supposed to, Kamala Harris compared it, this is just like 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. Yeah, right. And so as a society and our media is supposed to embrace this and make this. I think Nancy Pelosi wants to make it a national holiday. And I guarantee you within 5 years, there's going to be a January 6th memorial somewhere on the Capitol grounds. This is absurd.
This really is absurd.
And our culture and our politics is broken that this is such a big deal.
Well, and the misinformation that surrounds it, like to this day, they think that the insurrectionists just were murdering cops on their way into the Capitol building. Yeah. Like that's going to be the history when it's all set and written in the history books, right? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I wanted to say that I watched Tucker Carlson's special called Patriot Purge, and there's some compelling evidence that the FBI was intimately involved in this. There are a lot of people that are on camera that were telling the people go in, and they were really instigating the thing, and they have not been charged. So there's a lot of things that are still like up in the air. There's a lot that we still don't know yet. And I agree with Jim. This has been wildly blown out of proportion. The hyperbole is just, off the charts here. And when you really think about it, they didn't even do anything.
Well, they stole a podium, I think.
None of them had weapons. And the only person who was shot by a Capitol police officer.
Somebody put their feet on Nancy Pelosi's desk. Never forget. But yeah, I mean, like, the Republican politicians and media talking heads from day one were bending over backwards to condemn these actions because nobody wanted to run for elected office and have, their opponents playing footage of this just over and over again, right? So bending over backwards to condemn this. And then let's compare it to the BLM riots, the Antifa riots, the summer of 2020, when you had politicians completely condoning the violence. Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, was fundraising for bail for some of these rioters. You had media figures like Andrew Cuomo, he's persona non grata now, but he was the main person on CNN who was saying, and this is roughly a direct quote, where does it say that protests have to be peaceful? So could you imagine if there was people on the right side of the aisle that were saying or doing things that were even remotely comparable to those things that the left was doing after those riots in 2020? You would never hear the end of it. We're never hearing the end of it now, and they didn't do that. Right. Now, instead, you've got Ted Cruz that's that's referring to this as a terrorist attack. So, like, this is the world that we're in, and people question why we say it's a liberal media. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
This is all a political play. This is all being done for politics, obviously. I mean, during this morning's speech, I didn't listen to it because I can't listen to Joe Biden early in the morning because I need to get going. Even there's not enough coffee to get me through one of those. But as he was about to take the stage, Ron DeSantis, this is according to Twitter, Jay O'Brien, JOBTV on Twitter. He reports that Governor Ron DeSantis says that the anniversary of January 6th is, quote, not something that most Floridians have been concerned about. And that he says that today's events in D.C. will be nauseating and a politicized Charlie Foxtrot. And you can ask your military friends what that phrase means. And by the way, Florida leads the nation as a state for the number of people arrested for the January 6th. So Florida was well represented at the Capitol, and so it's interesting because this is going to become a political litmus test. That our media is going to hound every Republican running for president in 2024 to condemn in the strongest terms possible, and they will keep ratcheting it up. Condemning the January 6th riot, not an insurrection, not a coup, but a riot. And Ted Cruz has put himself on the side of calling it a terrorist act against the United States. And Ron DeSantis is on the side of, that it's no big deal. And it's going to be interesting actually to see how that plays out going forward, whether the Republicans who are going to play to the media and play their stupid games and condemn it over and over and over and over again, which is what they used to do to Trump, or people that are going to tell the media to go take a hike. And I prefer the latter.
Yeah. Like I said, at worst, you have people on the right that are just telling the truth. This was not an insurrection. This was a protest that turned into a riot. Shouldn't have happened. I don't condone this riot, but let's not pretend that it's something bigger than it actually was. And also get over it. Okay?
Let's also remember that President Trump offered the National Guard days before that, because there was talk of like a possible riot, and Nancy Pelosi turned him down. So makes me kind of wonder if she was wanting this to happen to some degree.
Of course, yeah. There's not going to be one Democrat campaign that doesn't have footage of this stuff and trying to paint this image of January 6th. Onto every Republican, that they're running against.
Of course.
And by the way, we should always remember that I think it was during this time, that photo op, that everyone got all crazy about, when the BLM Antifa rioters set fire to, was it St. John's Church across the street from
historical church?
The historical church, yeah. I think during all of that, there was a riot in Lafayette Park across the street from the White House. The president had to be taken into a secure location. Secret Service agents, I think at least a dozen of them, were injured trying to protect the White House grounds and the president against rioters. Nobody ever thinks about that again. Nobody talks about that. What was that? If an attack on the Capitol is an attack on our democracy, what is that? What is attacking the White House? I mean, come on. We all know that this is political. We know that the media has gone insane, and that only Chris of us three could actually watch it because it's just so disgusting and ridiculous. But that's what this is. Because if they actually cared about attacks on our democracy, attacks on politicians, how come we don't hear about the shooting of all those Republican baseball practice players from a few years back? We don't hear about that ever.
Why don't we ever hear about that? That was out of the news cycle within a week.
Yeah.
Of course,
and we will never hear the end of January 6th. But yeah, but an assassination attempt on multiple Republican members of Congress, putting Steve Scalise, who almost died. That's a week-long story. Let's move on to bashing Trump. Our media is so disgusting. I can hardly stand it.
How dare you?
It's unbelievable. So, like I said at the beginning of all of this, Joe Biden just completed his first trip around the sun as president, and I don't think it went the way that he expected it to go. It went awful. So awful that his approval numbers are in the sewer. If you could find that chart, or Jim, maybe if you can send it to Andy or something, I should have had this prepared beforehand, but it's a pretty crazy chart just showing Joe Biden's popularity just basically plummeting, or at least steadily dropping over the course of the last 6 months. So anyways, I thought it would be fun to reflect on just how bad a first year Joe Biden had and brainstorm up a sort of list of his lowlights. So this was actually going to be last week's episode. I thought it would be a nice little kind of almost fun thing to do for the end of the year, in the week of the New Year's and all of that. But like I said, COVID. So we're pushing it to this week. So who wants to go first? I figured this would just be an open to the panel here, brainstorming of just what are the worst moments of Joe Biden's administration so far. Chris, you got something on the top of mind?
Yeah. So for months, Joe Biden told us that he would single-handedly shut down the virus. I mean, he relentlessly made that point. And here we are 1 year, just shy of 1 year into his first term as president. And hey, guess what? More people have died under Joe Biden's watch than under Donald Trump's watch. Yet Joe Biden has been given 3 vaccines. Just his entire governorship of the virus has been a total disaster. I cannot stress that enough.
Yeah, this is my fault. I was hoping that would be the last thing so I could transition into the rest of the COVID talk. But no, that's a very good point, because I found this article is a Fox News article. It's in the show notes if you want to find it. Critics slam hypocrite Biden for claiming no federal solution to pandemic after vow to shut down COVID. So in this, there's a montage of, here's the chart if you're watching on YouTube. President Joe Biden's approval numbers just going in one direction pretty consistently for a while there. I think he is north of almost 53% disapproval and down to 42% approval. So it's not good. Not good for the old Biden dog there.
I can't believe 42% of people approve of this guy's job.
Yeah, seriously. But so in this article, this Fox News article, as Jim makes a whole bunch of noise with the microphone, there's a montage of Joe Biden during his campaign saying, quote, "I'm not going to shut down the economy. I'm going to shut down the virus." Apparently, these 12 words are what he could string together pretty nicely because there's him saying it like 50 different times. I'm not going to shut down the economy. I'm going to shut down the virus over and over and over again. Fast forward to about a week ago, Joe Biden releases a video talking about COVID and blah, blah, blah.
Make sure that we do not let federal solutions stand in the way of state solutions.
Something. So, yeah, he says that there are no federal solutions to dealing with COVID, that this has to be addressed at a state level. So understandably, the reaction to this has been, so you're just giving up? Like, is that the message that we're all supposed to take away from this? It seems like you're just giving up. Jim, what do you think?
Oh, it was always ridiculous when Joe Biden said that I'm going to not shut down the country. I'm not going to lock us down. I'm going to shut down the virus. It was, I can't believe anybody. Well, I hate to try to, I'm going to try to say it anyway. I can't believe anybody would be stupid enough to vote for Joe Biden based on that promise, because it's just not, it's just, but I guess there are people stupid enough to vote for him based on that promise. Mm-hmm. The fact that more people died of COVID in the first year of the Biden administration than in the last year of the Trump administration, when Biden had the benefit of having all of these vaccines. So that tells me one of a couple things. Maybe those vaccines don't prevent people from dying from COVID as well as advertised. I don't know. And that I just got this podcast banned again.
Yes,
but you know, it's not just Trump was criticized all through the campaign by the media and the Democrats working in tandem, which they always do, for not having a federal solution to solving COVID, to stopping COVID. You know why? One of the reasons why is because you can't do a federal thing. You can't federally lock down the country. You can't tell everybody what to do from Washington, D.C. We are a constitutional republic of states that have lots of rights and lots of ways that they can govern the people that live within their state borders. And so he left it to the states to decide. And actually that worked out great, because then we saw states like Florida and Ron DeSantis, who actually followed the science, didn't follow the panic, but followed the science and started letting people go outside. I saw a tweet the other day that was reminding me of what happened. Governor DeSantis opened his beaches. We had clips of people in California. There was a guy out there in California paddleboarding out there 150 yards offshore, and the cops are running on the beach to catch him and to haul him in for being on the ocean without a mask on, because they locked down all the beaches, can't be outside. Ron DeSantis actually followed the science and says, the enemy of all viruses is fresh air, especially fresh air blowing off of the freaking ocean, because that is the healthiest air you could possibly breathe. So Ron DeSantis opened up all of his beaches. He let people go outside. He said, you don't have to wear a mask anymore. And what we saw is that at worst, the COVID deaths and rates of infection were no worse in Florida than anywhere else, but he allowed his people to live like normal people. And at best, they actually have a better record on these things, especially compared to New York. There's a higher percentage of the population in Florida who are elderly and are in big trouble, if they get COVID. And more of that population died in New York than died in Florida. And so, we may even talk more about COVID again, because I think there's a lot more to say about it, especially now that the entire world and media and our bureaucrats are saying things that would get us banned from YouTube for saying 6 months ago, a year ago. Well, we've been saying it for 2 years.
Yeah.
But of Joe Biden's many failures, his inability to actually listen to the science and to just allow people and trust the people to make good decisions on their own, like you did, Donnie. You didn't get the vaccine, but you ended up getting COVID. And now a lot of people in those blue states and blue cities who were morally superior to all those who didn't get vaccinated, they're getting Omicron too. And so we're figuring out that, no matter how much you wish it, no matter how much you virtue signal, no matter how much you think, masking and all these things help, it doesn't. And one of the worst things that Biden has done is not acknowledge that this entire year. But now we're going to, I guess, reluctantly start to acknowledge it now.
This is, I think, if we're going to rank all of these lowlights, like this has got to be number one, because Joe Biden, I think, was elected on two things. One was a frustration of COVID and all of this. This has been lingering for a year or whatever. Maybe we need somebody else to fix it. It's not something that I subscribe to, but I could see how people could think that way. And number two, Joe Biden wasn't Donald Trump. So obviously he can't fail on that regard. But like he failed on this regard, and his statement that there's no federal solution to this, I'm throwing my hands up, there's nothing that me and the government can do, to me can only be interpreted as just giving up. It's just a complete failure. And guess what? I'm happy that he's giving up, because I don't want any of his federal mandates or anything like that. Some top-down, one size fits all type of policy for dealing with COVID. I'm fine with it. But the people that elected him because they wanted him to deal with COVID, and then he's just throwing up his hands and saying, I can't do anything. Like, how is that not just looked at as a humongous failure of his presidency so far? So I think I'm going to rank that as number one, unless we can figure out something that tops that.
I would say that the only thing that could possibly compete with, that is the number one failure Biden is his Afghanistan withdrawal. Because I think that, the COVID stuff is terrible. But the Afghanistan stuff, I mean, that has opened up a Pandora's box on the world stage, where you've now got Russia, possibly, entering Ukraine. You've got China, toying with Taiwan. So when Joe Biden, just pulled out of Afghanistan, leaving all that military equipment and just putting his tail between his legs, I think that made a very resolute message to the world that America is just is fundamentally weak, and it is not the power that it was under Donald Trump's leadership.
Yeah, I think that this is also in the top couple if we're ranking his lowlights. Whereas COVID and him giving up on COVID and all of this, just the failure of COVID, could be spread out over the course of his entire year. This was like a singular week in his presidency that was just an absolute disaster. He took so much flack from this across the entire corporate media. Not just people on the right side of the aisle, but the left as well. I think his poll numbers, if you pull up that chart again, you could probably pinpoint exactly where it was that the Afghanistan thing happened. And yeah, the implications of that, the effects, the lasting effects of that, and I won't get into all the foreign policy stuff and blah, 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 but we do know that it was done in a very, so I think it was August. It was
August, yeah.
Yeah, so it was right at the top there. Right at the top there. It's just the start of the plummet was Afghanistan. It really was kind of opening the floodgates. But, we've talked about the potential ramifications of this and how it puts China in a very strategic position to get all the rare earth materials out of Afghanistan. We covered this a couple of times on this podcast, that they were already sending in teams of people to scout out locations to pull out lithium from the ground, a rare earth material that's going to be increasingly more important if we keep running headlong into this silly idea that we can power the entire world on wind and solar energy. So just an all-around disaster that Afghanistan was. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, Afghanistan is worse because it was a choice. There's not a lot that the federal government can do to stop the pandemic. I'm going to stop the virus. No, you're not. No, you can't. You can't do that. So there's really not a lot that the federal government could do to make us not experience the COVID pandemic. You just can't. I mean, you can institute, like he did through OSHA, and this is all being challenged, vaccine mandates, or you get fired. You could encourage this sort of thing. So I guess there's a little bit of choice in that. But Afghanistan was the worst foreign policy choice that a president has made in most of our lifetimes, outside of starting a war under false pretenses. And there's been a lot of that going on over our history. But he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to withdraw and just, not even tell Britain that we're going, leave all that equipment behind, let terrorists take over billion-dollar military bases that we left behind. I mean, that was all his choice. He's responsible for that. And yeah, his poll numbers did started to go right to the toilet after that, and they should have. But is the media again ever talking about this again? No, they'll never talk about this again. But people remember.
Yeah, no, that is true. I mean, like I said, even people on the left kind of took it to them during that couple of weeks that this was kind of in the news. But it's definitely since been forgotten. But I assume that once the elections ramp up again, they'll start bringing this stuff up, reminding the public about just how much of a disaster it was.
Do you know what another bad one was? I think you might bring it up anyway. But this was another choice that Joe Biden made, which was to ban fracking. and basically, just we were on the road. We were not on the road. We were there. Energy independence. We were exporting our natural resources.
That's what I'll put.
That was a choice. That was a choice that he made. He didn't have to do that, but he did. And now look at us. And that, and so, you talk about the economy has gone into the toilet, and then inflation, pouring more money into the economy. Those are all choices that he made. But the energy decisions he made makes all this inflation worse. As energy prices, if you think inflation is bad now, it's made worse because transporting all of those goods that you see on the shelves, when that costs more, they cost more. And that was a choice that he made.
Yeah, energy independence. I'll put that as number 3 for now. That's one of those things. And I said this a million times, but I think it warrants repeating, which was the idea that America was going to become energy independent was seemingly a pipe dream for decades. I remember hearing that as a kid, just like, oh yeah, we want to be energy independent. And it was just like, okay, I feel like I've heard this a million times. It was just something that politicians would say when they were running for office, right? And then we actually achieved it under Trump. It was crazy. We actually achieved it. And then just as quickly as we got it, went away.
Beautiful, clean coal.
Obviously, we talk about energy policy a lot on this podcast, and because it's a very important thing. But yeah, like we covered his mandates, his restrictions when it comes to fracking and all of that, and the restriction on land leases for people to do more fracking on public land and all of that, and how this will eventually turn into higher gas prices and higher energy prices. It might take a little bit, but it's going to eventually turn into it. Well, we're starting to get to that point where it's actually manifesting into higher energy prices, higher gas prices. Mm-hmm. This is the bed that he made, and now we all have to sleep in it. And it's only going to get worse because they're going to continue to go down this path. I do have a couple of stories, one crazy one that ties into all of this energy stuff, but we're going to save that for next week. I think we're going to do a very energy-centric episode next week, but that's for next week. That's for next week to talk about. Chris, do you want to chime in on this whole destroyed our energy independence?
Yeah, I mean, on day one, he canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. And like you both have said, he has banned fracking on federal lands. And, we have gone backwards in less than a year. And now we are dependent on the Middle East to import oil again, which was the exact reason why Donald Trump, was his accomplishment of energy independence was so monumental. So I think that what the Biden administration has done is that they've taken a tack that we're going to do the exact opposite of almost everything that the Trump administration did, and just their sheer stubbornness is backfiring, and it's happening in the energy atmosphere. It's happening at the border. It's happening foreign policy wise. It's happening economy wise. It's so juvenile that everything he's done so far is despite the Trump administration's success. And the funny thing is, he'll pay the price for it.
Well, the craziest thing is, okay, like you want to move into this direction of wind and solar, renewable energy, right? And then when it doesn't work and we're faced with higher gas prices and all of this, and then you go to OPEC and beg them to produce more like oil, like those things just don't compute. You got to do one or the other, sir.
Right.
Like, you can't do that. You can't do both of those things.
Or his bogus ploy about releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which had no impact on the price of gasoline. It went down like 3 pennies for like a week or something. But really, that shows how desperate he is. I mean, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is supposed to be for emergencies. It's not supposed to be because your administration's doing a terrible job and the price of gasoline is skyrocketing.
Can we bring up that chart again of his approval numbers? Because in the world of politics, that's an emergency. So yeah, unleash the strategic reserve. My approval numbers are in the sewer. So yeah. That's the thinking that goes behind that.
Well, his response to that is just give people money.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's gonna be a reoccurring pattern, I think. Jim already kind of mentioned this, but I think this warrants its own number on our lowlights list, which is inflation. So Inflation is like Jim said, obviously this has got some facet of this problem is because of the high energy prices and high gas prices and all of that. But there's surely a number of things that are causing inflation to kind of run rampant. This was supposedly just going to be a transitory, and how we were only going to have to deal with this inflation just for a very short period of time as our economy gets back up and running after we get out of the lockdown and the panic over the pandemic and all of that. I think we are now in month 8 of the transitory. We're just dealing with very inflation on a very short-term scale here. But Chris, you probably write about inflation more than anybody on this podcast. Can you kind of briefly talk about how this is a low light of the Biden administration?
So the Biden administration's policies, I think, have contributed to the worst inflation we've seen in almost 4 decades. It's 6.8%. Even that's a false number because the CPI is not measuring inflation as it used to in the early 1980s. But his vaccine mandate has caused a lot of workers to drop out of the workforce. So there's pressure on the workforce. His COVID stimulus, which was completely unnecessary, poured another almost $2 trillion into the economy after we spent $6 trillion the previous year on COVID relief. Almost everything he's done has made inflation worse and has made the economy worse. Yet, despite all of this, just to show you how out of touch the Biden administration is, his chief of staff, Ron Klain, tweeted a couple months ago that inflation is a problem for rich people, when it's the complete opposite. Inflation is a tax on, and it disproportionately impacts poor people. So Joe Biden's promise that he would not raise taxes on people making less than $40,000, that is complete crap, because inflation is at its highest rate in 40 years, and that is killing the pocketbooks of lower income Americans.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like I said, even if they were to level it off and go back to normal levels of inflation, the damage is done already. Like nobody's projecting that we're going to have de-inflation and that prices are going to go back to what they used to be. Like the damage is done already. And the longer this lasts, the more damage is going to happen. And this is something that's affecting everybody. We talked about this. Some of these things, if you're not clued in to just the media, the whole Afghanistan thing would have come and gone. You wouldn't even have noticed it. But what people do notice when they go to the grocery store and pick up a pound of ground beef and it's $1 more expensive than it was, a couple of weeks ago, or when they go to get their gas prices to fill up their tank and they see that that's $1 higher than it was a year ago. Like those are things that are going to have an impact on you when you're running for re-election.
And real quick, I'm sure Jim's got a lot to say on this, but what I find most troubling is that he refuses to take any responsibility. Whatever happened to the buck stops, with the president. So who does Joe Biden blame on inflation? He blames big meat. I mean, give me a break. Give me a break.
Don't get us back into big meat.
Take responsibility. You're the president of the United States.
This podcast is definitely getting. This pod is definitely getting banned now. You can't say big meat.
I'm sorry.
Over and over again, and not have an explicit or something put on there. Look. I
parental advisory.
Right. I often ask myself, not just on this issue, but others, if you were trying, like in this case, if you were trying to destroy the American economy, exactly what would you have done differently? And the answer is you would not have done anything differently. You would have done everything that the Biden administration has done so far. Love him or hate him, but Donald Trump was actually, he cared about the economy. He cared about the private sector. He cared about not tying down our industries with useless regulations. He cared about not getting involved in foreign treaties like the Paris Climate Agreement that would only punish the American economy and basically pour money out of our economy and put them into the corruptocrats all around the world in the United Nations. He implemented policies and rejected policies that would hurt the U.S. economy. And we had the best economy that anyone listening to this podcast has experienced in their lifetime. Yes, that includes people alive during Ronald Reagan, like me. It was especially for lower, for For low income Americans, they got most of the raises going on. It was the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans in history. I mean, it was just great. And everything that this administration has done since then has been to destroy this economy. Sure, COVID had a big effect on the economy, but it was coming back and it was ready to keep going. And the Biden administration just put the kibosh on that. And again, we also have to remember there's another thing that happened that affects the economy, and that was the supply chain crisis. There was like I said, Joe Biden finally got his own, armada of fans out there in Long Beach Harbor. all of these container ships just sitting out there idling for weeks and weeks on end. And what did our Secretary of Transportation do? He went on a 2-month maternity leave, and so they just ignored 6 months. So they just ignored that problem. The left. The left, when it comes to the economy and leftists, and these are all the people that are now ushered back into government, believe that they are so smart that they can just figure things out and we'll manage the economy. We'll make sure people do the right thing, and that we need to get more people the goods they need. They actually do believe that they have the power and the ability to micromanage an economy the size of the United States. They can hardly even manage. They probably could even manage a bake sale by themselves without losing money. Like Kamala Harris the other day was asked about this. Well, what about the supply chain issue? And she just mouthed some kind of nonsense about, we got to get people to pay less for gas. Well, how do you do that? You know how you do that? You unleash the United States energy economy in this country. Forget that. We just need to find a way to make sure people are paying less for gas, and we want to make sure people are getting things on, when they go into the grocery store, that they're not paying as much and that there's things on the shelves. Hey, dummy! You know how you do that? You get out of the way, and then you actually do something to solve what the government said they're supposed to do, which is the transportation infrastructure in this country. But the hell with that. I think I'll go on vacation, and maybe I'll put a call for a lid on the day as president at 9:30 a.m. I don't need to do anything. All they have to do is just stop doing something. Actually, would be great, because every move they've made has done nothing but make this economy worse and worse, and we're just going to have to endure it for at least another 3 years.
So I was going to put supply chain disruption as number 5 on the list.
I keep jumping ahead of your list here.
You keep jumping ahead, but they're all intertangled things here. So I understand. But yeah, the supply chain issue, again, when like the shelves are empty and there's 500 boats lined up in the harbor waiting to unload all their stuff, and then your Secretary of Transportation just takes a vacation. Like, it's just, again, that's just like you're just painting this horrible, inept picture of yourself and your administration. So there's that. I will say that, and for all the people that are listening, that are watching us live here, put it in the comments what you think should also be included in this lowlights list. Because as of now, I got number 1, giving up on COVID. Number 2, Afghanistan withdrawal. Number 3, destroyed our energy independence. Number 4, inflation running rampant. Number 5, supply chain disruption. I'm going to put number 6 for now as Kamala Harris. I think that's just a failure of this administration. She has been so bad, so unlikable, that her approval numbers are substantially lower than Joe Biden's. She is so bad that they keep her basically in the closet because they don't want her out there talking and making a bigger mess out of things. It's like she has been such a failure that they don't even know what to do if Joe Biden did step down, because they don't want to run her. So I'm going to put her as number 6, as just her being vice president.
How about Biden's cabinet picks?
Yeah, that's another one. And the Secretary of the Treasury or something like that just withdrew her nomination because of all that fun stuff that Justin dug up on her. That was fun. But anyone else have any good ones that could be added onto this list? Because right now we've got 6.
Well, Donnie, I would definitely put the border crisis very near the top of that list. I mean, we went from having a secure border to open borders, and we now know that you've got people coming from all over the world. They are just, walking across the border. You have fentanyl at amazing rates entering this country. 100,000 people have died of fentanyl overdoses over the past year. That is directly attributed to the fact that the border is wide open.
Someone says acting like a dictator and telling people they should get vaccinated or else. That will probably go down as a pretty big blunder, although that does kind of play to his side a little bit. I think that, his side will probably actually like that he did that. So I don't know if that's going to be like on our list of lowlights, but on my personal list, it'll be on there because that was a pretty terrible move by him. Chris or Jim, anything else that we should any notable mentions here before we move on from this segment? It's a pretty exhaustive list.
I've got many more I could go down.
All right, just rattle them off. Just go ahead.
Okay, another one. So how about the fact that Joe Biden is incapable of hosting interviews? How about the fact that he's incapable of even hosting interviews in the White House? They have created a set across the street where he has a play school desk. It's tiny. It's hilarious if you ever see it. And they do these like mock, presentations that aren't real. It's almost like the entire administration is like this like pretend, movie. It's not even real.
Yeah, I saw that too. I did not get what I was seeing. That out the back, they had like a green screen where they could just change what's out the window.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre, but I think that is so symbolic of the Biden administration. It's not based in reality. It's fiction. It's fantasy. It's like a Hollywood scripted movie.
Yeah.
And whenever he goes off script, very bad things happen.
Jim, anything else that you want to make mention of here, or should we move on to our last topic of the day?
Well, you mentioned Kamala Harris, and I asked Andy to queue up this. There was this interview. She was interviewed in the hallway of the Senate office building. I believe I used to haunt those halls. And this is an example. So I just wanted the listeners to actually hear what a bad decision making Kamala Harris vice president would be, because she is literally a heartbeat away, and who knows how long Joe Biden's heart's going to keep beating. I mean, love or hate Joe Biden, but you got to hope he lives through the end of the next 3 years, because this is the woman who would take over. Go ahead, Andy.
People, they're going into their third year of this pandemic. You're talking about cost of living.
Mm-hmm. She interviewing
Was
herself?
it wrong to consider inflation transitory? I mean, these price spikes seem like they're going to be with us for a while.
We have to address the fact that we got to deal with the fact that folks are paying for gas, paying for groceries, and are need solutions to it. So let's talk about that. Short-term solution includes what we need to do around the supply chain, right? So we went to the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, Savannah, Georgia, and said, hey guys, no more 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, 24/7. Let's move the products because people need their product. They need what they need. We're dealing with it in terms of the long term, and that's about what we need to do to pass Build Back Better. It strengthens our economy.
People, they're going into their.
So just totally caught off guard. Like you don't have a prepared answer for inflation.
To call that a word salad is unfair to salad. I mean, it's unfair to Joe. I mean, as bad as Joe Biden could be answering a question, I think he does a little better than that on most times. When he's really sharp and his medication kicks in. But I heard a good description of that little clip from Kamala Harris. It's like a high school kid who's supposed to give an oral book report but didn't read the book at all, and so he has to just make things up and just say random things like we have to make sure people are buying gas, or I don't even know what the hell she said. I mean. And we need to do something about that. It's like, that's right. What is it going to be then? It's like anybody could say we need to do something about that. But, so this is the person, and Kamala Harris has this reputation. She's lost a lot of her staff this year. Like they didn't even last a year with her. And so this is in keeping with the reputation she's had all through her political career, is that she's a real bear to work for. And one of the real substantive criticisms that staffers that have left had with Kamala Harris is that no matter how much they try to prepare her for a question, the obvious question about inflation, she will not read her briefing books. She will not even look at the stuff that they give her for talking points so that she's prepared to actually sound like an intelligent human being on television. And then when she looks like an idiot, like she does in that clip, she turns around and yells at her staff like it's their fault. It's like, it's like, we gave you all the materials you needed. You were not interested in actually learning. She's not intellectually curious at all. Yeah. And so God, pray for the health of Joe Biden. As bad as he is, Kamala Harris, I mean, we may get invaded by China the day after Kamala Harris would be inaugurated president. Or maybe, you know what? It's even worse. We'd be invaded by Canada and we probably just lay down.
All right, so we've got a little over 5 minutes here, but I do want to get to this final topic to justify the thumbnail that I made for this podcast already, which is, are we approaching the end of the pandemic? And this might seem a little counterintuitive because of the spike in cases that we're seeing across the United States. We're seeing like a doubling of the previous highs, earlier in this pandemic and all of that. But it's this Omicron variant, which, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I assume that's the variant that I got, and it's not that crazy. Again, mild case. I'd put me out for a day and a half, but I think that this is kind of what everyone is experiencing. It's like finally the pandemic went through my front door. I'm actually feeling the direct effects of it. And it kept me, somewhat sidelined for about a day and a half. Can we get past all of this already? And that seems to be kind of the viewpoint of a lot of society now. Because like I said, a lot of people have this similar story. They finally got, this terrible disease that we've been warned about for almost 2 years now. And it's like, okay, that was it? Maybe we should wrap all this up. So just like Joe Biden throwing in the towel, Fauci came in hot on the heels of Joe Biden throwing in the towel and basically said, the CDC as well, said that, we're changing the recommendations for the isolation period for the people that get infected by COVID from 10 days to 5 days. So the justifications for this change in strategy, it seemed to be a little bit all over the map, or at least maybe there's multiple reasons for it. I've seen one reason saying that so healthy healthcare workers aren't sidelined for an unnecessary amount of time. They can get back into work so that they can help out. One I saw saying that so the economy doesn't suffer unnecessarily. I think Fauci even said something along those lines.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that there seems to be an across-the-board laxing of restrictions. I've got a couple of articles in the show notes. I won't get into depth in any of them, but there was a Newsweek piece. The UK won't add COVID restrictions despite huge Omicron surge, pushing booster shots instead. New York Times article, COVID updates. South Africa says its Omicron wave has passed and there's been no big spike in deaths. So it just seems like we're all just okay with just weathering this storm, and then once it's passed, let's get on with our lives here. Am I just being too optimistic about this, or do you think that that's kind of the trend, Chris?
I think most people are aware that Omicron is far more transmissible but far less lethal. So I think that is, part of what's happening across America. But I also find it very strange that schools are shutting down again. Chicago Teachers Union just voted a couple days ago that they were going back to remote learning. Universities across the country are shutting down again. So there's this like cognitive dissonance where even Anthony Fauci is saying, hey guys, this really is not as bad as, previous variants. However, you still have all these like left-wing organizations and cities across the country going back into lockdown mode, going back into permanent pandemic mode. So I think the American people, by and large, understand that it's like, it's done, it's over. But I think that there's a whole bunch of politicians and special interest groups who are trying to retain the pandemic as long as possible for their own personal interest.
I'll go to Jim next, but Chris, you mentioned the teachers unions and voting to return to digital learning or whatever, right? Remote learning. Mm-hmm. But like didn't and I'm talking about Chicago, didn't Lori Lightfoot like try to stand in the way of that happening, or like threatening to
they are at war with each other right now.
Right.
They're at war.
Hope they both lose.
Yeah, but Donnie, to be honest, my cynical viewpoint is that this is all political.
Definitely.
Lori Lightfoot's, she's going to be, on the election, campaign soon. So I think that she's trying to save her election prospects. And I think that these teachers unions and these teacher union officials, they don't care. All they care about is increasing their power and increasing their benefits, and they'll use this as an opportunity.
Yeah, well, the teachers unions, there was that one quote from one of the union bosses saying that my job is to keep teachers happy, not kids happy. So we know what their priorities are. But Jim, I don't know this. I really do think, especially considering all the stuff that's been said by Fauci and Joe Biden and even other talking heads on the media, it seems like this might be the last hurrah for any authoritarianism that's using COVID as their justification. I've seen recently that there was even like talking about how even the people in the hospitals with COVID, it's not necessarily there because of COVID. They just also have COVID on top of some of their other things. Or, the idea that maybe the tests aren't as reliable as we thought they were. Or, again, all of these things that we've been saying for a while that, would have gotten us banned. And now it's seemingly okay to say. Is this not the last hurrah of all of this stuff?
I hope it is. And I hope it's the end of us being lied to all the time by our government and our political betters about COVID. This has created a complete, false world this entire time. So yeah, Fauci is on, Meet the Press or one of those, because he's on everything all the time, but mentioning how like, hey, don't worry about all the kids in the hospital with COVID because they just came in for something like a broken leg and then we test everybody. And so they have COVID. So it goes down as a COVID case, but it's not really that. They're not in there because of COVID. That's the kind of stuff that we said on this podcast for the last 2 years.
Right.
And if you said that stuff on Twitter or Facebook, it would get you banned and you would risk your reputation for spreading misinformation. I frankly did not believe the COVID numbers right from the very beginning. Why? Because you could see that this was happening, that people were not hospitalized for COVID. They were hospitalized and happened to have COVID. There were incentives for these hospitals to label something a COVID death so that they would get more reimbursement from the government, especially if they were on Medicaid. This was known. These were facts. These were things that people out there in the world like us knew 2 years ago. But to say it out loud was somehow spreading misinformation. And now Fauci could just go out there and say it and everything's fine. So I think them actually saying these truths that have been true the entire time is a sign that perhaps we're going to be going back to normal and that all this COVID psychosis, this massive psychosis is going to go away. And then the other sign that this is happening is that people in the media, our elite media, in New York and Washington, D.C. are now saying things like, I joked with you about this, Donald. A lot of these media people, especially on Twitter, because they live on Twitter, will if you got COVID and didn't get a shot, shame on you. You're the reason why we're never able to get out of this kind of thing. But now all these media elites, they've been fully vaxxed, they've been boosted, and they get Omicron. And they're starting to stroke their chins and wonder, maybe I was a little too hard on all those people that didn't get vaccinated and blaming them for keeping this pandemic going. We said, again, just one last bit, because I know we're over time, but, we said on this podcast that it was not cases that mattered. It was deaths of COVID, not from COVID. And there were still lockdowns in cities like San Francisco and New York City when the rolling average of COVID deaths, even if they were counted as dying with COVID, was 1 or 0. And they still had all these lockdowns because of cases. Now suddenly we don't care about cases anymore. That's great. We shouldn't care about cases. What matters is serious illness and death. And so, for Fauci to actually say this, and without even acknowledging that people have been saying this for 2 years and been shouted down and banned from social media, it's good that it's happening. And maybe this is the light at the end of the tunnel when our elites are finally admitting the truth and stop lying to us about almost every aspect of COVID from the day one.
Yeah, this is a very interesting kind of political implications too, because we know that midterms are right around the corner and how important that is, and it's like you've got the Democrats in a position where they don't know whether or not. I don't know what their strategy is with COVID. If they're going to try to say, oh no, it's still such a bad deal. Like you got to make sure that we're in there to deal with it because the Republicans are just going to fumble the football. Or are they going to be like, oh no, it's not a problem anymore because we fixed the problem. And I think Biden's statement that's like, oh yeah, there's nothing I can do about it. You guys have to figure it out. Kind of putting up that white flag almost seems like they're not going to go in that strategy. So it'll be very interesting to see because it looks like no matter which way you cut it, they failed when it came to COVID. But
Donnie, I wouldn't cut.
Final word.
Yeah. I wouldn't discount the fact that they might use COVID as their way of using the election to do mass mail-in voting and all that other kind of stuff that they used in 2020.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right. We are already long, so we're going to call it a day for this episode of In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. If you're listening to the audio only, it's probably a Friday. You could join us on Thursday live. If you watch on Facebook or YouTube, you can join in the conversation, put in your comments, ask a question. Maybe we'll put it on screen. Maybe we'll respond to your questions, etc., etc. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. And Chris, you are a ghost on social media, so just join me in saying goodbye to the fine people.
Goodbye, everybody. Happy New Year, and we'll see you next week.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. Talk to you next week.